Chapter 2. Before long, people began looking at me as a special person. Partly, this was the result of my own changing attitude about myself. I was growing, getting bigger, gaining confidence. I was given consideration I had never received before. It was as though I were the son of a millionaire. I'd walk into a room at school, and my classmates would offer me food or ask if they could help me with my homework. Even my teachers treated me differently, especially after I started winning trophies in the weightlifting contests I entered. This strange new attitude toward me had an incredible effect on my ego. It supplied me with something I had been craving. I'm not sure why I had this need for special attention. Perhaps it was because I had an older brother who'd received more than his share of attention from our father. Whatever the reason, I had a strong desire to be noticed, to be praised. I basked in this new flood of attention. I turned even negative responses to my own satisfaction. I'm convinced most of the people I knew didn't really understand what I was doing at all. They looked at me as a novelty, a freak. My actual acceptance was limited. There were certain social groups in which the people were intimidated by bodybuilding and felt they should talk down to me. They tried to point out weaknesses in the sport and argued why a person shouldn't do it. I've been through these trips all my life. There's a certain kind of person who always says, "My doctor tells me lifting weights is bad for your health." In the beginning, it was kind of hard for me to handle. I was young and impressionable. I knew I wanted to do it so badly nobody could stop me. Least of all people I wouldn't even bother to count as friends. But many times I did question it. I wondered why I was so different, why I wanted to do something a lot of people didn't like and even made fun of. If you played soccer, everybody loved you. You were a hero, and they gave you anything. People recognized my athletic talents, but my choice of a sport confused them. They shook their heads. Why did you have to pick the least favorite sport in Austria? They always asked. It was true. We had only 20 or 30 bodybuilders in the entire country. I couldn't come up with an answer. I didn't know. It had been instinctive. I had just fallen in love with it. I loved the feeling of the gym, of working out, of having muscles all over. Now, looking back, I can analyze it more clearly. My total involvement had a lot to do with the discipline, the individualism, and the utter integrity of bodybuilding. But at the time, it was a mystery even to me. Bodybuilding did have its rewards, but they were relatively small. I wasn't competing yet, so my gratification had to come from other areas. In the summer at the lake, I could surprise everyone by showing up with a different body. They'd say, "Jesus, Arnold, you grew again. When are you going to stop?" "Never," I'd tell them. We'd all laugh. They thought it amusing, but I meant it. It wasn't only my friends at school and the lake who were impressed. The neighbors, too, began giving me special attention. "If you need fresh milk, just tell us," a neighbor would say. "I know for lifting weights you need milk, or eggs, or vegetables." Suddenly, everyone around began regarding me as different, no matter whether they liked it or not. They couldn't overlook it. The strangest thing was how my new body struck girls. There were a certain number of girls who were knocked out by it, and a certain number who found it repulsive. There was absolutely no in-between. It seemed cut and dried. I'd hear their comments in the hallway at lunchtime, on the street, or at the lake. "I don't like it. He's weird. All those muscles give me the creeps." Or, "I love the way Arnold looks. So big and powerful. It's like sculpture. That's how a man should look." These reactions gave me added motivation to continue building my body. I wanted to get bigger, so I could really impress the girls who liked it, and upset the others even more. Not that girls were my main reason for training, far from it, but they added incentive, and I figured as long as I was getting this attention from them, I might as well use it. I had fun. I could tell if a girl was repelled by my size, and when I'd catch her looking at me in disbelief, I would casually raise my arm, flex my bicep, and watch her cringe. It was always good for a laugh. I remember there was one of these negative girls I wanted to date. Her name was Herta, and I knew she claimed she wasn't turned on by my body. I wanted to try and change her mind. I pursued her, and gradually, we became friends. Finally, one day I got up the nerve to ask her on a date. "I wouldn't go out with you in a million years," she said. "You're in love with yourself. You're in love with your own body. You look at yourself all the time. You pose in front of the mirror." Her statement came like a slap in the face. At first I was angry. Why did she refuse to understand it? Why did she have to turn on me? But it was predictable, and I got over it. I don't think she ever did, though. The last time I was in Graz for a visit, she called me a number of times to say she was divorced now, and how nice it would be if we could get together. Nobody seemed to understand what was involved in bodybuilding. You do look at your body in a mirror, not because you are narcissistic, but because you are trying to check your progress. It has nothing to do with being in love with yourself. Herta would never have told one of the track stars he was in love with himself because he had someone check his speed with a stopwatch. It just happens that the mirror, the scales, and the tape measure are the only tools a bodybuilder has for determining his progress. Herta was hardly typical. I had no difficulty getting girls. I'd been introduced to sex with almost no hang-ups. The older bodybuilders at the gym had started including me in their parties. It was easy for me. These guys always saw to it that I had a girl. "Here, Arnold, this one's for you." Girls became sex objects. I saw the other bodybuilders using them in this way, and I thought it was all right. We talked about the pitfalls of romantic situations, serious ones, how it could take away from your training. Naturally, I agreed with them. They were my idols. My attitude about all that has changed radically. I used to feel that women were here for one reason. Sex was simply another kind of exercise, another body function. I was convinced a girl and I couldn't communicate on equal footing because she wouldn't understand what I was doing. I didn't have time to take one girl out regularly and go through a normal high school romance with all its phone calls and notes and squabbles. That took too much time. I needed to be in the gym. For me, it was a simple matter of picking them up at the lake and then never seeing them again. In fact, it wasn't until 4 years after I started training that I had any meaningful communication with a girl. I couldn't be bothered with girls as companions. My mind was totally locked into working out, and I was annoyed if anything took me away from it. Without making a conscious decision to do so, I closed a door on that aspect of growing up, that vulnerability, and became very protective of my emotions. I didn't allow myself to get involved, period. It wasn't a reasoned choice, it just happened out of necessity. I started this practice early in my career and continued it for as long as it served to help me maintain a clear focus and drive myself toward a fixed point. This didn't mean I had no fun. I was only selfish and protective of that part of myself that people seemed always to want to get at in a relationship. And the more successful I became, the more strict I was in guarding it. I couldn't afford to have my feelings hurt during heavy training or just before a competition. I needed stable emotions, total discipline. I needed to be there training for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night, concentrating on nothing except perfecting my body and bringing it to its peak. Whatever I thought might hold me back, I avoided. I crossed girls off my list, except as tools for my sexual needs. I eliminated my parents too. It seemed they always wanted to see me. Then when I was around, they had nothing to say. I grew accustomed to hearing certain questions. What's wrong with you, Arnold? Don't you feel anything? Don't you have any emotions? How can you answer that? I always let it pass with a shrug. I knew that what I was doing was not only justifiable, it was essential. Besides, if I did miss out on the emotional thing because I was so dedicated, I believe I benefited in other ways that finally brought everything into balance. One of these was my self-confidence, which grew as I saw how much control I was gaining over my body. In 2 or 3 years, I had actually been able to change my body entirely. That told me something. If I had been able to change my body that much, I could also, through the same discipline and determination, change anything else I wanted. I could change my habits, my whole outlook on life. During the early years, I didn't care how I felt about anything except bodybuilding. It consumed every minute of my days and all my best effort. But now that I train only an hour and a half a day to maintain my physique, I have time to work on the things I neglected. I can bring out those emotions I had to put away years ago and build them back into my life. I can use the information and discipline I learned in bodybuilding for perfecting other aspects of my life. Now, if I catch myself holding back an emotion the way I used to, I work on bringing it out. I try to make myself more responsive. When I see that I have certain backward attitudes, I reason them out and work to make my outlook more realistic. I know there are some people who will say that this is not the way to do things, and I imagine they are the same people who always said bodybuilding was bad for your health. I proved that was wrong. I know that if you can change your diet and exercise program to give yourself a different body, you can apply the same principles to anything else. The secret is contained in a 3-part formula I learned in the gym: self-confidence, a positive mental attitude, and honest hard work. Many people are aware of these principles, but very few can put them into practice. Every day, I hear someone say, "I'm too fat. I need to lose 25 pounds, but I can't. I never seem to improve." I'd hate myself if I had that kind of attitude, if I were that weak. I can lose 10 to 40 pounds rapidly, easily, painlessly, by simply setting my mind to it. By observing the principles of strict discipline that bodybuilding taught me, I can prepare myself for anything. I have developed such absolute control over my body that I can decide what body weight I want for any particular time and take myself up or down to meet it. 2 months before we started shooting Stay Hungry, Bob Raphaelson came to me and said, "I'm afraid of hiring you for this film, Arnold. You're just too goddamn big. You weigh 240, and if you're in a scene with Sally Fields, you'll dwarf her. I'd like you to be much leaner and more normal looking in street clothes." I said, "You worry about your film and I'll worry about my body. Just tell me what day you want me to show up and at what body weight, and I'll do it." He thought I was pulling his leg. He wanted me to be down to 210 pounds, but he didn't think I could ever do it, so I bet him I could. The day the filming began, Raphaelson went with me to the gym to work out and take a sauna. "Step on the scale," he said. I weighed 209 pounds, 1 pound less than he wanted me. He couldn't believe it. I kept the weight for 3 months, until the shooting stopped. Then I got an offer to do the film Pumping Iron. The only way I could do it was to compete in the Mr. Olympia contest. Within 2 more months, I would have to go back up to 240 pounds, the weight at which I felt I reached the ultimate in size and symmetry, and then cut down to 235 for maximum definition. I did it easily and won the Mr. Olympia contest. From the very beginning, I knew bodybuilding was the perfect choice for my career. No one else seemed to agree, at least not my family or teachers. To them, the only acceptable way of life was being a banker, secretary, or salesman, being established in the ordinary way, taking the regular kind of job offered through an employment agency, something legitimate. My desire to build my body and be Mr. Universe was totally beyond their comprehension. Because of it, I was put through a lot of changes. I locked up my emotions even further and listened only to my inner voice, my instincts. My mother, for one, didn't understand my drive at all. She had no time for sports. She couldn't even understand why my father kept training to stay in shape. But strangely enough, she always had the attitude, let Arnold do what he wants. As long as he isn't a criminal, as long as he doesn't do anything bad, let him go on with his muscle building. She changed her outlook as soon as I brought home my first weightlifting trophy. She took it and ran from house to house in Thal, the little village outside of Grass where we lived, showing the neighbors what I had won. It was a turning point for her. She began to accept what I was doing. Now, all of a sudden, some attention was focused on her. People singled her out. This is the mother of the guy who just won the weightlifting championship, the mother of the strongman. She too was treated as a champion. She was proud of me. And then, up to a certain point, she encouraged me to do what I wanted. We still had our differences. She and my father were Catholic. Every Sunday until I was 15, I went to church with them. Then my friends started asking why I did it. They said it was stupid. I had never given it much thought one way or the other. It was a rule at home. We went to church. Helmut Knauer, sort of an intellectual among the bodybuilders, gave me a book called Pfaffenspiegel, which was about priests, their lives, how horrible they were, and how they'd altered the history of the religion. Reading that turned me completely around. Carl and Helmut and I discussed it in the gym. Helmut insisted that if I achieved something in life, I shouldn't thank God for it. I should thank myself. It was the same if something bad happened. I shouldn't ask God for help. I should help myself. He asked me if I'd ever prayed for my body. I confessed I had. He said if I wanted a great body, I had to build it. Nobody else could, least of all God. These were wild ideas for someone as young as I was, but they made perfect sense, and I announced to my family that I would no longer go to church, that I didn't believe in it, and didn't have time to waste on it. This added to the conflict at home. Eventually, there was a split between my parents about me. My mother obviously knew what was going on with me, and the girls my friends lined up. She never came out and said anything directly, but she let me know she was concerned. Things were different between me and my father. He assumed that when I was 18, I would just go into the army, and they would straighten me out. He accepted some of the things my mother condemned. He felt it was perfectly all right to make out with all the girls I could. In fact, he was proud I was dating the fast girls. He bragged about them to his friends. Jesus Christ, you should see some of the women my son's coming up with. He was showing off, of course. But still, our whole relationship had changed because I'd established myself by winning a few trophies and now had some girls. He was particularly excited about the girls, and he liked the idea that I didn't get involved. That's right, Arnold, he'd say, as though he'd had endless experience. Never be fooled by them. That continued to be an avenue of communication between us for a couple of years. In fact, the few nights I took girls home when I was on leave from the army, my father was always very pleasant and would bring out a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses. Part 2. My mother still wanted to protect me. We had to hide things from her. She was too religious. She imagined the awful state of my soul, and she felt sorry for the girls. To her, it was all somehow connected with bodybuilding, and her antagonism for the sport grew. It bothered her that this had not merely been a phase of my growing up. "You're lazy, Arnold," she would shout. "Look at you. All you want to do is train with weights. That's all you think about. Look at your shoes," she would say, grasping at anything. "They're filthy. I've cleaned your father's because he's my husband, but I won't do yours. You can take care of yourself." That aspect of it was getting to my father as well. The girls were all right. He liked that. And the trophies. He had a few of his own from ice curling, which we did together. But every so often he would take me aside and say, "Well, Arnold, what do you want to do?" I would tell him again, "Dad, I'm going to be a professional bodybuilder. I'm going to make it my life." "I can see you're serious," he would say, his eyes growing thoughtful. "But how do you plan to apply it? What do you want out of life?" A silence would grow between us. He would sigh, go back to his newspaper, and that would be the end of it until he felt compelled to question me again. For a long time, I would just shrug my shoulders and refuse to speak about it. Then one day, when I was 17 and had the plan more firmly in my own mind, I surprised him with a full reply. "I have two possibilities right now. One is that I can go into the army, become an officer, and have some freedom to go on training." He nodded his head gravely. He felt I'd finally hit upon something. It would have made him proud for me to devote my life to the Austrian army. The other alternative is to go to Germany and then to America. America? Now I was talking nonsense again. I had already weighed out the good points of being an officer. The Austrian army would give me schooling, food, and clothing. Then, as an athlete, I would be allowed unbelievable freedom. There was an elite military academy in Vienna that specialized in sports. They would equip a weight room for me. They would see that I had the best of everything. My father and I talked more than once about that as my final goal. He looked at it as a career in the army. I saw it as the means to an end, winning Mr. Universe. My father was concerned that I might be unable to earn a living from bodybuilding, that I would waste myself and my potential. A career in the army was my last choice. My real aspiration was to somehow get to America. I'd always had a claustrophobic feeling about Austria. "I've got to get out of here," I kept thinking. "It's not big enough. It's stifling. It wouldn't allow me to expand." There seemed never to be enough space. Even people's ideas were small. There was too much contentment, too much acceptance of things as they'd always been. It was beautiful. It was a great place to be old in. Reg Park still dominated my life. I had changed my routine a few times. I kept the old exercises, the standard ones I knew Reg used, but I modified them to my own needs, and I added new ones. Instead of doing just a barbell curl, I did a dumbbell curl too. I thought continually of making my biceps higher, giving my back thickness and width, increasing the size of my thighs, working on the areas I wanted to emphasize. I was always honest about my weak points. This helped me grow. I think it's the key to success in everything. Be honest. Know where you're weak. Admit it. There is nobody in bodybuilding without some areas that need work. I had inherited from my parents an excellent bone structure and an almost perfect metabolism. For that reason, it was basically easy for me to build muscles. However, there were some muscles that seemed stubborn. They refused to grow as rapidly as the others. I wrote them on note cards and stuck the cards around my mirror where I couldn't avoid seeing them. Triceps were the first I noted down. I had done the same amount of biceps and triceps exercises. My biceps grew instantly, but my triceps lagged behind. There was no reason for it. I had put as much effort into my triceps, but they refused to respond. The same with my legs. Although I was doing a lot of squats, my legs didn't grow as rapidly as my chest, and my shoulders didn't improve as much as my back. After 2 years, I could see that certain parts hadn't changed very much at all. I wrote them down and adjusted my workouts. I increased some exercises. I experimented. I watched my muscles for the results. Slowly, I adjusted and evened out my body. It was a long, almost unending process. At 18, I still didn't have my body equalized. There were weak points to work on. I was limited to what I knew and what was available locally to learn. I was held back severely by the Austrian mentality in bodybuilding, which was just to concentrate on big arms and a big chest, as though photographs would always be taken only from the waist up. Nobody I knew really considered the serratus or the intercostals, the muscles that give the body a look of finish, of quality. And that kind of provincial thinking was to hamper me for a long time to come. I went into the army in 1965. 1 year of service was obligatory in Austria. After that, I could make my decision about a future. For me, the army was a good experience. I liked the regimentation, the firm, rigid structure. The whole idea of uniforms and medals appealed to me. Discipline was not a new thing to me. You can't do bodybuilding successfully without it. Then too, I'd grown up in a disciplined atmosphere. My father always acted like a general, checking to see that I ate the proper way, that I did my studies. His influence helped get me assigned as a driver in a tank unit. Actually, I wasn't well suited to be a tank driver. I was too tall, and I was only 18. 21 was the minimum age, but it was something I badly wanted to do. The necessary strings were pulled, and not only was I allowed to drive a tank, I was also stationed in a camp near Graz. That enabled me to continue training, which remained the most important part of my life. Shortly after I was inducted, I received an invitation to the junior division of the Mr. Europe contest in Stuttgart, Germany. I was in the middle of basic training, and our orders were to remain on the base for 6 weeks. Unless someone in your immediate family died, you were absolutely forbidden to leave. I spent a couple of sleepless nights wondering what I should do. Finally, I knew there was no alternative. I was going to sneak out and go. The junior Mr. Europe contest meant so much to me that I didn't care what consequences I'd have to suffer. I crawled over the wall, taking only the clothes I was wearing. I had barely enough money to buy a third-class train ticket. It crept out of Austria into Germany, stopping at every station, and arrived a day later in Stuttgart. This was my first contest. I was nervous and exhausted from the train trip, and I had no idea what was going on. I tried to learn something by watching the short men's class, but they seemed as amateurish and confused as I was. I had to borrow someone else's posing trunks, someone else's body oil. I had rehearsed a posing routine in my mind on the train. It was a composite of all Reg Park's poses I'd memorized from the muscle magazines. But the instant I stepped out before the judges, my mind went blank. Somehow, I made it through the initial posing. Then they called me back for a pose-off. Again, my mind was blank, and I wasn't sure how I'd done. Finally, the announcement came that I'd won. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Europe Jr. When I look at the photographs that were taken then, I recall how I felt. The surprise wore off fast. I drew myself up. I felt like King Kong. I loved the sudden attention. I strutted and flexed. I knew for certain that I was on the way to becoming the world's greatest bodybuilder. I felt I was already one of the best in the world. Obviously, I wasn't even in the top 5,000, but in my mind, I was the best. I had just won Mr. Europe Jr. At first, the army was not impressed. I borrowed money to travel back to the base, and they caught me as I was climbing over the wall. I sat in jail for 7 days with only a blanket on a cold stone bench and almost no food. But I had my trophy, and I didn't care if they locked me up for a whole year. It had been worth it. I showed my trophy to everybody, and by the time I got out of jail, word had spread through the camp that I had won Mr. Europe Jr. The top majors decided it lent some prestige to the army and gave me 2 days leave. I became a hero because of what I'd gone through to win. When we were out in the field, the drill instructors mentioned it. You have to fight for your fatherland, they said. You have to have courage. Look at what Schwarzenegger did just to win this title. I became a hero, even though I had defied their rules to get what I wanted. That one time, they made an exception. In basic training, my bodybuilding gave me a tremendous boost. It put me way ahead of everyone else in physical prowess. And that, added to the notoriety I'd gained from winning Mr. Europe Jr., gave me a special status in the eyes of the officers. I went on to tank driving school and loved driving those big machines and feeling the sturdy recoil of the guns when we fired. It appealed to the part of me that has always been moved by any show of strength and force. In the afternoons, we cleaned and oiled the tanks. However, after a few days, I was excused from those afternoon duties. An order came down from the top that I was to train, to build my body. It was the nicest order I could have had. A weightlifting gym was set up, and I was ordered to go there every day after lunch. I brought my own dumbbells and some of the machines from home because the army had only barbells and weights. They were strict about my training. Every time an officer walked by the window and caught me sitting down, he'd threaten to have me put in jail. That was his duty. If you got caught goofing off when you were supposed to be oiling and greasing the tanks, you'd be put away. The army felt it was no different with what I was doing. I must train, they said. I must be lifting weights all the time. I paced myself and used this opportunity to continue building the foundation I'd begun 3 years before. I devised a way of training 6 hours at a stretch without getting totally wiped out. I ate 4 or 5 times a day. They allowed me all the food I wanted, but in terms of nutrition, army food wasn't worth much. It took a couple of pounds of the overcooked meat they served to provide the amount of protein you'd find in an average-sized medium-rare steak. Taking all this into consideration, I consumed huge quantities of food and then tried hard to burn off the extra calories. Throughout the time I was in the army, I divided my training between bodybuilding and Olympic weightlifting. I was interested in lifting heavy weights over my head. The image of myself with a loaded barbell pressed up and my arms locked took a long time to get out of my system. Before I was 18, I had competed in the Austrian Championships, winning first place in the heavyweight division. But after the Mr. Europe Junior contest, I stopped Olympic lifting. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I'd done it primarily to prove a point, that a bodybuilder not only looked strong, he was strong, and that well-developed muscles were not merely ornamentation. Many people regret having to serve in the army, but it was not a waste of time for me. When I came out, I weighed 225 pounds. I'd gone from 200 to 225 pounds. Up to that time, this was the biggest change I'd ever made in a single year.